I'm really honored today to have this extraordinary panel of individuals. Larry, Frazier, and Alvah, Beander, and I go way back. So they're a part of that important circle of professionals, legal and art, who are so critical to this whole mission of bringing art before you and helping you to understand how to care for it properly for your legacy, if that be your desire, but just culturally because it's so significant to who we are. And then we are honoring and welcoming for the first time Berrisford, Boothe, and Devin. I've been practicing that. Devin Briggs from the Petrucci Family Foundation, who are building an extraordinary collection of African American art. So I'm going to keep the introductions brief. We expanded upon them in an email, which you all received, or you would not be here. So these people are well experienced and very knowledgeable, so I really want to make time for them to share their knowledge and expertise with you this afternoon. So we're going to begin with a presentation by Alvah Beander. She is the owner of Melanin Art Appraisals, the consummate appraiser, the most extraordinary appraiser in the world of African American and African diasporic art. And yes, she paid me to say that. So Alex, would you start the presentation? Alvah is ready to present.
All right. You have to seat someone.
I'm Alvah Beander, and I know many of you. I'm very happy to be here today. As she said, it's been a long journey with Myrtis and Larry and our new friends here. And I know many of you in the audience. Thank you for coming. For me, this is a very important topic. So many people have misunderstandings about who we are, what we do. So hopefully I can help address some of those questions in your mind about what we do. Define an appraiser. These are the questions that I was given to speak about. So there's this idea about who an appraiser is and what they do. We do not define appraisers. The government does. And I was going to give you a handout on this, but my granddaughter told me it was too boring. So this is it. And this is the short version of it. So again, when we start seeing who an appraiser is and what they do, we do not decide who an appraiser is and what they do. The government does. And when the government does that, other institutions follow their lead. So all institutions don't, but primarily now they do. So who do they say we are? They say this on what's called the 8283, which we're going to talk about later. We are people who have earned a designation from an association. There are three primarily associations for personal property appraisers in the country. So they are the American Society of Appraising, I'm a member of that, the ISA, International Society of Appraisers, and AAA, which is the Association of American Appraisers. Personal property is defined not only by fine art, but by jewelry, clocks, antiques, anything that basically is movable and outside of the realm of real estate. So your china, your silverware, and all of those kind of things are considered personal property. I'm also a member of RICS, which is the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. That is the mothership of appraisers out of London from 1893 or something like that. So I'm their first African American to be inducted as a member. So I'm really excited about that. We grind. We grind. Okay, so they have to meet certain minimum education education and experiences. They have to regularly do appraisals and get paid for it. So it's not that you can be a hobbyist and do this. This is not the way the government looks at it. Again, if you don't go with these requirements, your appraisal may not be accepted by the government for charitable donation or your insurance company for insurance scheduling. It is not mandated, but it's highly recommended, and it can be rejected. They are very careful not to make it a mandate because there are some people who practice as an appraiser that they cannot disqualify in a court. So those few people keep this from being a stringent mandate. So some of you know a person like that. So I'm happy to always say Dr. Anza of Howard University. Now, who's going to be able to disqualify him? Before all these requirements got into place, he was doing this work on a regular basis. He was charging for it. He has the academic background, and he is an African. So he can, and he teaches African art. He's now retired, but he was a person like that. David Driscoll was someone that, you know, they tried to disqualify as an appraiser. But before people like me came along, and it's only now still about 20 of us that are African American that are certified, they were able to say that they didn't meet the qualifications, but they were the only people doing the work during that time. So I always, you know, appreciate the work that they've done so that they set up the guidelines for us or the ability for someone like me to be an appraiser. What is USPAP? What is USPAP? USPAP is another one of those long definitions that my granddaughter wouldn't let me pass out to you. Because I find it so interesting, you know, but she was like, really, that's a lot of words together and no pictures. So I'll explain to you USPAP. USPAP is the standards in which we are governed by to do appraisals. People say, you know, how do you know what a piece is worth? And people are always coming up to me saying, how much is this worth? How much is that worth? How much is this worth? I have no idea. I have to look it up. We have to look for any given day that the appraisal is done or dated for. What is the price that that would sell for on that particular day? It's like real estate. You know, it changes. The market changes every day. There's no running number that we can keep up with for any artist, and especially now so many artists. So there's a methodology in which we have been taught. But the USPAP was set up by Congress. So that should tell you something. It's Congress. So they change their lines a lot of times. New regulations come out every 2 years at the minimum. I was on a 7-hour class last week. I'll be on a 6-hour class in 2 weeks. It's an ongoing process of keeping up. And when we're asking questions, even as we're talking to the IRS or to the Congress representative or to the Appraisal Foundation people, you know, they're like, well, we're not sure about that. We'll get back with you. And so everybody's in the air, especially right now. Many of you are in the air because I have some clients here that I know are in the air about what the new tax regs are going to be, what they mean. We know what they are now, but even being on a call with the IRS and asking questions, they are saying, we got to get back with you on that. They're not sure how this is going to really play out. So a lot of people made their donations last year with the certainty of knowing what the rules were for last year. In 2018, they're going to still get back with us, even though they're in play. So, yeah, that's how they do. So this was set up, though. Some of you are old enough to remember the savings and loans. Banks, do you remember that?
Say the word.
So, we're being taped on this, right? Okay. The savings and loans debacle is the way we like to see it in industry. So because of that, that's why Congress got involved and set up the Appraisal Foundation to set up these standards that we have to follow so that, in quote, won't happen again. Even though that did just happen again not too long ago. The same scenario that happened with the savings and loan happened again. what happened was we appraisers who have a lot of power to say how much something is worth would agree with the mortgage banker who wanted to give you a higher mortgage because you qualified. Say you qualify for $800,000, but the house is worth $625,000. This appraiser does a lot of work with Wells Fargo and Bank of America, and he looks at him and said, Mr. Frazier, he qualifies for $800,000, and you're saying that this is, so what did the appraiser do? We're independent. This guy gives him a lot of work all year. What did he say? It's $800,000. And everything is fine until Mr. Frazier meets Mr. Harvey. He wants to sell his house to Mr. Harvey. Mr. Harvey gets a whole nother appraiser, and he comes in with, this is worth $600, whatever price I said before, and now he's not happy. And that's what happened. That's what happened in the real estate market. So think about it like this. Personal property, we're under the same guidelines as real estate. So those guys are what messed it up for all of us, and we say that loudly. And I used to be the president of my organization, which is mostly the real estate guys, and 10 of them were sitting in jail for this. So they take this very seriously, and we, the personal property appraisers, we are terrified of them. So when you say, oh, I think this thing is worth $1 million because I love it and my cousin did it, you can figure out how I feel about that, right? As I like to say, I'm not going to jail for them. So, okay, so what are the types of appraisals? Oh, I have it. I walked away from it.
Oh, you're right there. The clicker.
Very quick. Oh.
I'm not.
I got the paper in the thing. Okay. What determines what we do is by the intended use. Anybody who's dealt with me know that I barrel down on you. How do you want to use this appraisal? People think that there's one appraisal and it works for everything. It does not. This is a short list of the reasons that you need an appraisal. But one of the main things to remember is usually some institution wants an appraisal, requests it, and will not work with you without one. If you just want to know how much your stuff is worth, you can go online and do it yourself. Basically, appraising is about a report that has to be produced that is for USPAP compliances, for your insurance company, for your tax people, for the courts, for an estate. So it's kind of not in the hobby thing, like I just want to know how much this is worth right now. So non-cash charitable donations, that's of course what we give to universities, museums. Insurance scheduling. You need to have a rider on your insurance for art. It's in the category of personal property, but if you have a loss and it's not on the rider, they're going to give you whatever the maximum was on that, the regular schedule. So if you lose like $300,000 worth of art, and the regular thing for personal property is $20,000, they're going to give you $20,000 only. So you have to have it appraised so that you can make sure when we get to the insurance claim that they will be able to pay you the amount that the piece is worth. Now on that too, be very careful in transporting. When you're transporting art, it's usually done by pennies to the pound. So it's like 50 cents per pound when you're doing transport. So a lot of transportation companies don't necessarily offer you the rider. You must ask for the rider, insist on the rider, to make sure that you have an appraised value for the transport of art. Because otherwise you'll get 50 cents on a dollar, literally. And that's, if that, and that's weight. When I say it's on the pound, I shouldn't say on the dollar, on the pound. So you got a Jacob Lawrence and it weighs what, 7 pounds? 7 times 50 cents. That's, and that is, they can do that because it's spelled out in their document, which has a very little bit of writing they have on there. Estate planning, we're going to talk more about this today, and estate settlement. They're two different things. Settlement kind of works after you're not here with us, and your family or your trust or somebody something is trying to figure out what the settlement should be. If you're in the state of Maryland, you do have probate, and we have a lawyer who's going to talk to you about that. And estate planning, though, is what you should be doing now, so that you will determine what you want to happen with your art. There should be a separate plan from your house and some of the other things. You think your children love your art? I don't even have to go any further with that. I can tell some people. This is something you need to discuss with them. Let them pick the pieces they like, if they like any of them. And if they don't, if you have a college or an institution or library or a historical society that might be interested, you need to start a discussion with them now, because I do not do any charitable donations or any estate planning that hasn't had an acceptance letter from the institution. Yes. And this is because the government makes us their eyes and ears. And the issue is, some people say they were donating, but that transfer never happened, and the appraisal was done, and they got a write-off or something. They never transferred to the organization. The government does not like that. So they make us the eyes and ears of that. So now, before a donation can be made, I need a gift of deed or a letter. It can be simply an email from someone from the institution with all this, their contact stuff on it, saying, yes, we do want 8 pieces of art from you, and this is when the transfer is going to take place. Bankruptcy, we see a lot of that. I don't have to explain it. For bankruptcy, they're going to liquidate the pieces or whatever you have, get the money for it, and pay your bills for it. So we do appraisals for that. Equitable distribution, we never like to say the word, but we got the 3 Ds: debt, death, and divorce. So this is one of the hardest areas that we work in, because it's usually not a pleasant environment between the people. Property transfer, corporate financial planning, we'll go to that, and nonprofit. Nonprofit financial reporting, a lot of the HBCs now, thank you Lord, we have to do this kind of nonprofit financial reporting. So we're working with a lot of institutions right now to get their pieces appraised. Oh, okay, quickly, the types of values: replacement value new, replacement value comparable. That's when we go into the market and see what other pieces are. The replacement value new kind of goes more to if it's a commission piece and you have to get a new piece commissioned. Fair market value is the one we're going to be talking about today. That is for estate tax or either charitable contribution. That is the lowest allowable amount, and not the market value, which is the highest value. So the market value is for insurance. The fair market is for anything that has to do with the government, because they're not going to let you have the highest and best value. Salvage value and scrap, that's usually with the institution. So the question is, how often do you need an appraisal update? That is determined by your insurance company. It is in your policy what that requirement is. Usually it's 3 to 4 years. And why do you need it? I'll just give you some examples right here. This is a Wadsworth Gerald. It was estimated to sell for $25,000 to $35,000 at Swan Auction. It sold for $97,500. When there is that big a jump in the market, you need to be calling your appraiser, because we need to look at your pieces and update the work. And you can just move, that was in the catalog, just move it. So I just came from down the street there, seeing Ms. Crosby's work down at the BMA. Now, how do you know? People always ask me, how do you know who the next hot person is? I don't. So I have a friend, Cynthia. She's down in Palm Beach. She calls me. She's all excited. Oh, you got to see this artist. And she's taking pictures and sending it to me. And I'm like, I never heard of her, because I don't know everybody. So Cynthia, thank you very much for bringing my attention to her, because her piece was at Christie's, estimated at $551,000. to 827,000, and I thought, oh, Cynthia, you hit on a star here. Well, guess what? It sold for $3.4 million. That's what we said. She's on my red chart now. And then I'm going to end it with this last piece because you are now all familiar with this artist. And this is the piece that was entered into the Audubon contest. How do artists change their market? Here's one way. You enter a contest, you're encouraged by
Galerie Myrtis.
Galerie Myrtis Bedolla, who's calling me, sending me images. Look at this. She's going to enter the contest. You know, this is an amazing artist. You're really supporting her. She entered that contest, and the rest is history. Is there anyone that don't know who she is now and what her prices are? She is the portrait artist for former president. I wanted her to be president, but former First Lady, Michelle Obama. This is the artist that, did the portrait that, you know, is all the talk. And she's saying she can't even produce now enough for the market to bear. So what does that mean? Prices are way up, okay? And she actually has a physical situation that she really cannot produce with so many. But again, founded by a local gallerist who encouraged her to get in a contest that put her before millions of people that never seen her work because she was known in Baltimore. Yeah. That's how we know. That's how we know.
Yes, and if you should venture into the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, the portrait that Amy painted, Grandam Queenie, was acquired through our gallery. So there was a time where Galerie Myrtis proudly represented Amy, and we're so proud of her accomplishments. The recognition that she's receiving is well earned. It's been hard earned and well deserved. So now we're going to move on to Mr. Frazier. Attorney Larry Frazier is going to present. And before I forget, Alvah and I both have handouts for you, and we'll distribute those at the end of the program.
Did everyone get the money?
They're behind Matisse. Your handouts are behind you. Mariah, could you get the handouts? You can hand them out while he speaks.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
See the recording stuff. Anyway, it's great to be back here again and to have this conversation with you about those things which you're so passionate about. I take it that everyone here, Alvah mentioned a thing earlier about, you know, your children, you know, if you can't go in the microwave, if you can't go in the dishwasher, you know, they just don't have quite the interest in it. And that's okay, and that's what I tell people, it's okay. Because they have their other things, you know. I wish I could come up with some of these digital, you know, intellectual things that they come up with and get paid a whole lot more than we could ever imagine. So, but anyway, I still think it's important for the things that you have for cultural purposes particularly, because this is a record of that we existed in terms of those things which made the culture. One of the questions she asked me was the role of an attorney for purposes of art collectors. And I'll begin with, first of all, that for estate planning purposes, I think it's so important that you have a plan of some sort. Because if you don't have a plan, the government has a plan for you. There is a plan. It'll either be yours or the one that the government will deal with. And the way that an attorney can help you with that is, as I said, helping you prepare the documents that are necessary to carry out your wishes. Otherwise, you may be caught up with, and my thing is that I think it's actually more important that you deal with having documents that will cover you during your lifetime. Because think about it, when you pass away, you don't really have to worry about what's going to happen with the stuff. Somebody else is going to deal with it. And you may be rolled over in your grave, as they say. Or maybe, you know, the dust blowing up from your ashes. But the real deal is in terms of you having some type of document in place to designate who's going to be in charge of handling your financial and management affairs, not to mention your health care and making decisions with the doctor. So in that regard, I think it's just as important that as a part of that plan, whether it be in the form of just the power of attorney or if it be just in the a part of a trust document, that you have someone designated who you trust, hopefully someone who's also knowledgeable about what your artwork and your, I'm sorry, not your artwork, but your collection. And that can be in the form of a, if in fact you have a will, you can designate a art executor, person who's going to be responsible for dealing with the art end. If you have a trust, it could be in terms of the art trustee. With regard to the power of attorney, the reason I say it's important is, let's say, for instance, you become incapacitated, you know, and you find a lot of people, maybe they may end up in an accident or whatever, they may be in a coma, they may, a number of things that can happen. Now, some of them are fortunate enough to recover. So, I mean, you've heard of people being in a coma for a month, even longer, and somehow coming back out, or someone being in some type of physical incapacity and come out of it. But in the meantime, you want to make sure that you have someone that is properly managing your collection or dealing with it in the same way that you would dispose of your collection. You want to have that in place. Let's just say, for instance, you need some money to take care of you for your medical bills, because if anyone knows about how the bills can go up if one who is, you know, sort of connected to tubes and a lot of other things going on, and then not to mention that you have some people who insist on they want all this to happen in their home. They don't want to go out. So the price tag goes up and up. So, but there's no better thing for you in that particular instance, maybe to have your artwork to pay for some of that. But you need to determine how that's to be done. Because if you don't have a thing in place, when the buyers come to purchase from your collection, they're all cherry pickers. Okay? They want what are the best items in your collection, and those are going to be the things that they're going to try to purchase. And then maybe by the time if you survive, and you come back and you like say, why don't I only have these prints? And not all of that, but they are not even signed prints. So it's important for you, the same way that you would deal with disposing or selling or whatever you are, you need to talk about that with someone and try and have someone to put that in some form of a document. It doesn't necessarily have to be as formal as, particularly in terms of the disposition of it, but it needs to be, that topic needs to be discussed. You need to think about it, because someone, just Alvah said, you know, your children may not be interested in terms of becoming instant art dealers. You know, their friends show up and say, oh, you know, I like that. Say, oh, you do? Really? Yeah, okay. So, and it has nothing to do with in terms of them not loving you, not appreciating you or whatever, but as we say, things happen. So, and of course, most of you, well, maybe you don't know, but the instruments to deal with your estate planning would be, of course, a will. Everyone's familiar with a will. So it's very important that you have the right person to be the executor of your will. It's also, you might have, and I mentioned the trust earlier, you can just have a trustee, but you might have a special art trustee for purposes of your artwork. Then you want to have a power of attorney for financial management, a power of attorney for healthcare decisions. And I think it's also important these days, particularly to have an advance directive or a living will. That's in the event that you should become completely supported by some artificial means. What your wishes are with regard to whether you want to be kept on it, at what point you want to be taken off. And so therefore, you won't create a lot of disharmony in your family, because otherwise you have someone saying, oh, we shouldn't let them lay up here like that, and the other person saying, oh, they wouldn't want to lay up here like that, so we need to do something about that. So that is very, very important for you to have those discussions while you're able to deal with it. The other thing that people have, you may have a part of planning might be in terms, you may have life insurance, so therefore you have beneficiaries who will receive the money immediately. You may own joint property with someone, so therefore at your death it automatically goes in. You may have a bank account with pay on death provisions. And you, what else did I leave out? Joint beneficiaries of life insurance. And these are called will substitutes. And then with the deed itself, a lot of places in DC now we have what is called a, it's almost like a pay on death bank account, except you do a deed that becomes effective at your death. So therefore the property doesn't have to go through the probate. But in the meantime, you have it during your lifetime. If you decide to change your mind, you can still do that as well. But it just is a way to sort of streamline. Another way is if in fact you're considering to make a gift or to a person or to an institution. And that is very important for you to consult with someone about that. Because there's a lot of things that can happen if it's done wrong. And it's the kind of thing that, for instance, once it's done, if you didn't properly do it or a way that was advantageous to your estate or even to your, what your ultimate plans are, you can't go back and change it, okay? Because when you make a gift, it's generally what we call an irrevocable gift. What do we used to call it? It's politically incorrect now. We say Indian trader. You remember that term about of course, we were the ones guilty of doing that, our society. But anyway, it's important that you think about that particularly. And Alvah already mentioned the whole point about before with the appraisals. If it's going to an institution, she wants to see that acceptance letter before. And I'll get into more about this whole thing about, when I've negotiated for purposes of people with considering giving a gift to an institution. But it's very, very important that you consider doing these things before you step into the ring. Because once you step into the rings, fists start flying. I'll talk a little more about in terms of this partial gift. Any of you heard about in terms of a partial gift to an institution? Never heard of that? Because sometimes what people do is they will give a partial ownership. And this generally has to do with based in terms on what they're doing with regard to their tax consultant. Whereas to donate part of it and then another part goes at a later time, for instance, when maybe their finances, whatever, can absorb in terms of that deduction. But anyway, again, it's the kind of thing. What I generally do is I team up with the tax consultant for the person. And that person deals with the numbers and gets them in place. And then, of course, they'll deal with the appraiser to find out what numbers we're dealing with. And then I'll prepare the documents or whatever the agreement is going to be that will ultimately transfer or make the contribution. Now, a lot of institutions want these days, since if you're considering providing, well, not providing, but giving them art, just because you're giving it to them doesn't necessarily mean that they will take it. A lot of them now want you have to give a cash distribution or cash request to go along with in terms of it's going to be for the maintenance of it, storage of it, and all that. Because art becomes a liability for an institution. We think of it, we have it in our homes, we enjoy it and carry on, but for purposes of an institution, it becomes a liability. So therefore, they have to, unless it's something that they really, really want, because I have clients all the time say, well, I want to keep my collection together. And I want, whoever gets it, well, that's a lot of dreaming and you create these little institutions going to take it, then fine. But that is one of the things. You have to also think about what the form of the gift is going to be. Whether it's going to be a gift during your life or if you want to make the gift at your death. That's very important. And then you want to consider about it in terms of legacy considerations. Now, some of us, we want to, I'm going to do this, but I want to make sure I'm going to be recognized for it. So they say, fine, okay, we'll build a gallery wing. Put your name on it and put your collection in there. Well, that's a pretty heavy ticket to do so. But at any rate, that can be done. You can have, it might just be that you're going to cover for a particular reception that's done each year in your name. When maybe 2 of your pieces are going to be shown. There are a number of ways they can do that, and one of the other creative things is you might even want to be sponsor a curator particularly if you give it to a educational institution, then you might want to endow the money to pay for the curator. So therefore, it'll be in the name of, Joe Blow's, Alvah Beander, Joe Blow curator, or whatever. So there are a number of ways that you can be creative about if you're considering a legacy. Now, she also mentioned the thing about you developing a personal relationship with these institutions, and that is very, very important if you're trying to get in on the, well, I'll put it this way. If you want to have some juice for purposes of, if you'll notice that most of the people on most of the major museums who are on their boards, these are people who've also made a decision to either contribute or are going to, either during their lifetime or at their death, certain pieces. Because you'll see in the museum, they'll say, give promise from whomever. But that's part of the thing that, for instance, what they're looking for. They're looking for people to be on their board who have things that they want. But not only that, they want them to also participate in some of the activities that are going on. You might participate in a fundraiser. They have their annual fundraiser every year. So you get out and you sell a couple of tables for that. You put together a group of people to purchase, to make an acquisition of a particular artist that you like, who you think is, coming up, and hopefully, you have them already in your collection. I'll give you sort of a case in point. I'm sure all of us now are familiar with Basquiat. It was all of a sudden these prices went beyond. Well, the prices went beyond because there was a certain segment of the population that had control of that market of his paintings. I remember the first major show that I went to at the Brooklyn Museum. A third of the paintings were owned by one person in that show. So just think about that now and think about the prices now. So basically, you have a lot of people who sort of get involved in working the market for them. So those are the kinds of things that are very important for you to think about ahead of time before you do it. She mentioned about the valuation issues. So you need to know what the value is and how that's going to ultimately to affect, what you are considering giving to the institution. What else? Then you want to certainly consider the impact upon the inheritance of a major work of art or collection. Now, some of you might be fortunate enough to have, an aunt and uncle who has a major collection, and then at their death or when they become ill, they decide they want to give it to you. Right at the point when they're talking about giving it to you or when you receive, you need to think about what your ultimate plans are for that. You need to think about what the impact of them giving it to you. That's fine? Okay. The impact of them giving it to you. Presently, we have now in place the federal estate tax maximum is $10 million, thanks to the person who sits in the White House now. Okay? It's $10 million. It's like it was increased. It was doubled really because it had been like at 5.4. So it's at $10 million. So if you have an estate of more than $10 million, then you want to consider, anything else coming into the barn for purposes of taxes. You want to also think about if in fact you have any pieces in your collection that are fast appreciating. Because you want to if you're going to give them away or get them out for purposes of that, you want to get them out and let them appreciate somewhere else. So that's not a part of the burden of if you could be so lucky to have that as an issue. For purposes of taxes, in the same estate tax in Maryland, it's $4 million. And in DC is now attached to the federal. So DC is now $10 million. So these are numbers that you should keep in mind. And then for purposes of gifting to loved ones, well, I'm saying particularly in terms of loved ones, not to mention institutions, because institutions you can get the full value of whatever it is, but you have the right to donate up to $15,000 in value to one person, you know, during the course of a year. So if it's a husband and wife, they can do $30,000. This happens, sometimes what they do is they will do, say for instance, your daughter and her husband, then so really you're looking at $60,000. Because if you and your spouse do 30 to each one of them, then in the course of the year, so that's another way of that an attorney can help you along with the tax person in terms of moving these things without any major tax consequences. So you want to think about how to do that. The other question that she asked me to answer was, does the value of your art collection determine if an attorney is needed? And I say not necessarily. It just depends, goes back to Alvah's thing about when you're having an appraisal done. You know, what is the purpose with your art collection? You know, I think a lot of you, at least my whole thing has always been to buy those things, you know, which I liked. Not that I'm building a collection or anything like that, but, you know, if I spend my money, it's a collection. But to buy what you like, and so no matter what happens with the value, you will get your value out of the enjoyment of it. And there's some people that have collections like that. And then there are those people who deal with it from an investment standpoint. So if you have, as I just mentioned, these big numbers, this $10 million and this $5 million, this $15,000, those are the kinds of things, and therefore you might want to get an attorney to help you determine how you're going to dispose of it, you know, during your lifetime or at your death, or even if you're going to sell it right after you receive it. Because everybody doesn't necessarily have a real strong passion for the art, particularly who you. And it's a good thing to sometimes to sell it in order to finance your grandchild's college education. You know, maybe someone had a major illness. So these things are fine to do as well. And I think art can certainly play into that, along with, you know, if you have stocks and securities and those kinds of things. But, you know, you can deal with art in the same way. One of the other things I've given you is a copy of an inventory collection form that I have developed over the years. I think it's very important, and you can help all the professionals who will later on help you, whether it be your tax consultant, whether it be the person who's going to be in charge of your estate or the management of your estate during your life, because it gives a written record of your knowledge about the pieces that you have. No one knows your collection better than you. And as you acquire things, if you would begin to document this information, it can certainly be helpful not only to others, but to you as well as a form of reference. When we talk about in terms of when you sell something, you know, what kind of capital gains would be on it. If you're in fact making a gift, what kind of deduction you can get for it. So all of these are the kinds of things that are on this. As I said, and you're free to make as many copies of it as you like for purposes of each piece that you might have in your collection. Because as I said, when Alvah comes along, if you hand her one of those sheets for the pieces there, it makes it, and I'm telling you, this is true. Now, there's also is that my time?
Yes.
Okay, there's also some programs out there that you can actually put this in computer. You know, I was dealing with one estate, we did this with the estate, so therefore, for purposes of loaning the things out, all we had to do was pass a wand by the barcode, and the stuff was there. So thank you.
So we next have Berrisford, Boothe, and Devin.
Get out of your background. Everybody can have a 7th inning stretch right now. Is there, Alex, do you think you can get on the internet by any chance? I'm going to give it a shot. If she just tries. She's good. All right. Lovely, good afternoon, evening to everyone. My name is Beresford Boothe. I am, by Larry's definition, Joe Blow, creator of whatever. I'm giving Larry a bit of a hard time because we were last together at the Allentown Art Museum to be in the presence of the inimitable and brilliant David Driscoll in conversation with Curly Raven Holton. And I was pleased to be with David again in Miami at the Perez Art Museum, which is a fantastic institution. while talking there in celebration of their purchase of a piece by Shaba, or as they call her, Shaba herself, David, who is just such a font of information and accrued wisdom, said something that I thought I'd start with before I do the formal introduction of what we're doing and use up the rest of my 19 minutes. And David said, and I use this in the context of collecting, and he said, what we're dealing with is that area of spiritual definition of self that says, art serves us best when it serves everybody. And I've been asked today to speak with you about the curator's role in, what's the official thing you've got, Myrtis? This lovely title that she put together here on the first page. The role of the curator in developing the educational art collection. Adjacent to me on the other half of my brain, to my left, is Devin Leonore Briggs. She has joined us now for 3 years. Before that, she was my studio assistant. She attended MICA, as did I, undergrad. I was a graduate student under Babe Shapiro and Sal back in the day here at MICA, and I have fond memories. We both stopped and had a moment of heartfelt joy at being back in Baltimore. Spent a lot of informative years here. If we can go back to the first one, please, Evan. So just a quick encapsulation. The Petrucci Family Foundation collection is an extension of the Petrucci Family Foundation. And it's one of the primary reasons why I got involved. And the second primary reason is because Jim Petrucci, the owner of the collection, has been a friend of mine for almost 30 years now. And when the collection started, that was about 25 years. And the third aspect of why I agreed to do this, because I am a college educator, I am a visual artist, I am an installation artist, I raised 2 kids who are bigger than me, so I really don't have time to collect art for a client. And the third reason that I did that is why Myrtis and Alex have asked me to come and share this brief conversation with you today, and that is the educational component. So I found out, once I got on board to help Jim put together this collection, just about 6 years ago, that the Petrucci Family Foundation, under Jim's guidance, had been putting in resources in some of the most underserved communities in New Jersey. Irvington, Patterson, West Orange, wherever, East Orange, New Jersey. And he was just putting these resources in, especially in educational settings. Football players, young individuals who've gone through trauma in their families and needed support. He somehow would find a way to find the people to get the resources. So I felt that was a wonderful springboard and for a point of interest and entry for me to help build a collection, not only as, Devin, can you bring that up again for me, please, on that? I just wanted to give you a brief summary here of what we're doing, and just 1 or 2 paragraphs in terms of our mission statement as it refers to what Myrtis has asked me to do here. The PFF Collection of African American Art is a targeted initiative to bring focus to the full range of African American visual creativity and its essential place in the history and discourse of American art. In understanding of African American art, history is vital to the full understanding of American artistry. The PFF Collection offers continuing proof that African American art is integral to the rich tapestry of American creative traditions. Long overlooked, art of this caliber, with its specific cultural voice, is both essential and enlightening. So I'll stop there. You can see the rest of that at our website, pffcollection.com. So when I realized that Jim was collecting for, actually the foundation had a history of creating educational initiatives, I realized that I had an opportunity not only to be the curator, which now is an overused term. I understand when I started this it meant something. Now apparently I can curate cheese boxes. But I'm still looking at it in its original context. That I could step aside from my 27 years of teaching at Lehigh University, my entire life of being interested in the visual arts, my career that was enhanced here in Baltimore, and really start to not only protect the legacy, but provide it in the context of scholarship. When I was a graduate student here at Maryland Institute, I was fortunate enough to have my sister, Myrtis' sister, I call her my lover, my mother, my spirit guide, Leslie King Hyman. And I took the first course. Now here I am, I came out of a really decent college, top of my class, top of stuff in high school, and I waited until I was a graduate student in Maryland Institute College of Art to take an undergraduate elective for the first time to understand what African American art was. And that's the first time I called into question every PhD that had taught me. It was like, why is your PhD valid? You know, as the old adage says, if your culture is a mandate, my culture is an option, we have a problem. So part of my desire, my impulse, my drive, my passion to put this together is to present young people of color as the primary but not singular audience for this. I think one of the mistakes we make when we put collections together and we put collections like this, which is not part of Jim's personal collection. There's only one piece that's in his house. Devin, can we bring back the Elixir? There's only one piece out of 250 pieces approximately that we've acquired in 6 years with 4 major exhibitions. And this is the piece by Elixir. Did any of you see her exhibition when she was here about 5 years ago? I'd never heard of this woman. My initial consultant before Devin and I got into this, we began to acquire pieces from deacquisitions from other collectors. And I was, again, introduced to someone that is the only person in the collection who's not an artist of color, but a woman from France who lived in French Indochina and wound up after the atrocities of the sort of changeover in the 50s and 60s in the political climate there in North Africa, doing these beautiful, sensitive portraits of North African women. And this is the only piece that's actually in the collector's home. Not because he has an aversion to that, he has a very well-appointed home in New Jersey, but because his wife is smart enough to know that if his assets are on the wall, he'd be sitting there sort of eating dinner going, did I pay too much for that? And so he told me from the beginning, and as you said, Larry said, that some of these collections are about investment. So initially, full disclosure, Jim had called me and said, what about collecting art for a return on investment? I said, I'm not really interested, but here's a plan. So I drafted a 6-phase plan, collect these artists, collect an organic process, etc., make sure a certain percentage. So I did the work for him, gave it to him, and he said, no, I need you to do it. I said, no, I'm not doing that. I have a secret thing in my life where I try not to sign on for things that I'm going to fail in. And so he persuaded me to do this, and after this, and now we can proceed, Devin, we were able to get this from a collection, this beautiful piece by Bedolla Knight. Continue, and then we had this lovely surrealist, sort of borrowing from Giorgio de Chirico a little bit, piece by Benny Kosh. And at this point, Jim said to me, I want to change the structure of my original argument. Why don't we just collect African American art? And I said, go on. And he said, I want to shift this slowly, and let's start with this. And the first thing I did, as Leslie had taught me, was scholarship. You know, if we're going to talk about what my two predecessors talked about in terms of appraisal and value and protecting these assets, well, one of the things I have to do from an educational perspective is make sure that every time this collection is shown, whether in part or full, that it is accompanied and enhanced and buttressed by scholarship. So it's one thing to have the work there, to have someone look at a Charles Alston or look at a Barbara Bullock and think, oh my God, that's astounding. Or to look at a John Biggers with the red dot next to it, hello. And have the students say, that's really beautiful. And I can, as an educator, I can talk to them about why it's a beautiful piece of art, and John Biggers' mastery of repetition and diminution and blah, 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 blah. That's great. But what's more important is to be able to put that in the context of the continuing, evolving voice of the African American in this country. And that the African American is as unique to this country as gospel music, blues, or jazz. Now, the rest of the country seems to have no problem owning those, but not owning us in the same context of value. So I'm trying, and following in Jim's footstep in the foundation, to bring artists like Barbara, and Devin's just going to flip through this, because there's a bunch of things to see. I'd rather you have that as a backdrop with my speaking. Hold on a second, there's Barbara's wonderful piece, Stories My Grandmother Told Me. That piece at the Portland Art Museum, we have many images, again, as a part of the educational outreach. Jim had regularly provided resources. As you said, if you're putting this stuff out there and saying, I'm going to gift it to an institution, what we discovered is that we put these exhibitions together at William Patterson University and Gettysburg College, that a lot of the institutions we wanted to target didn't have the budget, you know, so we could provide the content. In some cases, we could help provide the insurance and, you know, pick up a little bit there, but then otherwise we were like, well, how do you get the kids there? How do we fulfill the mission from an educational perspective? We couldn't. So then I had to meet with Jim and say, here's how we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to take the PFF mission and append it to the PFF Collection of African American Art mission, so that one of the things we hold special is we become this collection that is not only about scholarship, it's not only about inspiration, it's not only about the validation of the African American voices and authentic American voice, not only about continuing to drive home the point that the history of America, no matter how vast, no matter how comprehensive, if it does not include the voices of people of color, and proportionately a voice of the gender, women within that subgroup, then we're not having full American history. Why is that so important? You know why. If you're a middle schooler in an underrepresented, underserved institution, and you think of your history as one of slavery, of slaves, as if that was a starting point, and then slavery, and then maybe if you're lucky the Harlem Renaissance, and then the Black Panthers, and then Black Lives Matter and Rodney King. That's incomplete. So what we continue to do is to provide an opportunity for these young people through Jim now funding school buses. I went home 3 days ago, actual truth, got a quick email from Jim, which Devin and I laugh about, because he's a brilliant man, a giving man. He runs a company in, 2-3 states, and he's very economical with words. So he'll give a directive that'll be like 3 words. So I opened my mail and said, look at this. And I was like, okay. And there were 20-something yellow ruled sheet papers of young people from Irvington High School who he had, without consulting me, because that's independent of the collection, provided transportation, entry fee, all that stuff, had it all waived. And they had never been to a museum, half of them. They'd never, forget African American art, they just had never seen or been part of that. That is not that odd. I'm 57 years old. I left Jamaica and grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. We're now negotiating with the Wadsworth Athenaeum to do a major show there. I remember standing outside the Wadsworth Athenaeum in the 1970s, my fingers freezing while I waited for the school bus to take me from the black part of town to the white part of town, where I went to a Catholic school, looking at the Wadsworth Athenaeum and thinking, I'm an artist, and I know there's art in there, but I ain't going in there. You know, and just feeling so completely outside of that. And so in one lifetime, now I can go back and work with the director and provide an initiative, and I know everyone in the community from an education perspective. The city lawyer, we went to school together. The city councilman, who's a brother of my best friend in high school. So I can now tap every single demographic to show them the work. The thing I love about doing, that's a lovely piece of stuff, back one. Oh, that, Calvin Burnett. The thing I love about this is that going into this, I had to accept that I have a MFA in visual arts. And Leslie was my entree. I'm fond of saying, I think I might have told Myrtis this, that why I'm so driven passionately about this collection being one that is servicing education and scholarship is because Leslie had said to me when we studied Africans in the New World, she said, the most important thing on the first day, she said, is scholarship. Because there's tons of books about African American art out there. Find the ones you can trust. Find the authors you can trust. Otherwise, you're moving the whole situation backwards. So when I started this collection, I'd love to sit here or stand here and say to you, aren't I wonderful, and isn't this wonderful, and isn't Jim wonderful, and Devin is exceptional. But there's a person who's not here today, who was here last time that I was here, that I'm smart enough to go to, and that's Louis Tanner Moore, grandnephew of Henry Asawa Tanner, who's a dear family friend. So the first thing I did was not get up and go, thank you for your money, I love the art, let's go collect stuff, but find the person who could connect me to other individuals who had the educational chops, the scholarship, Dr. Lowry Stokes Sims, all these people, Curly, David, who, you know, now understand the mission of the collection as enhancing the narrative, creating the circumstance for better understanding, but fundamentally, as Curly said to me, do you know how rare what you're doing is? And I said, no. He said, I can't think of another collection that is really not a personal enterprise, but one specifically for exhibition, for enlightenment. Along those lines, we had, thank you very much, love. Along those lines, we had in those 6 years 4 exhibitions. I said we had one at Gettysburg University, where Shannon Egan, if you don't know her, she's awesome, wonderful curator there at the gallery, and she called me up and said, how would you feel about having the kids in the Africana Studies program write the essays for the catalog? And I thought, wait a minute there, Baba Louie. And I said, all right, let's go, but they've got to pass it through me. And I'd never done that before. It's our, inaugural exhibition. It was fantastic. We went to a gathering of, I don't know, 200-300 people. The kids were in their, best suits and dressed up in the podium, and they were proudly talking about artists 6 months before that they never heard of. And they owned it. So I went to this thing, and I stood in the back. I wouldn't even allow myself to be introduced. Because now I had kids, most of whom were not of color, who now, for the rest of their lives, were embedded with a sense of value and an understanding of the culture and a desire to move forward. That's what Leslie did to me when I started this. And she was kind enough when I was teaching at Lehigh University, and I went there and I tried to find a book in African American art, and the only thing I found was one volume on Jacob Lawrence. This wasn't 1950-something, folks. This was 1991. And I got a junior faculty grant, went to the Corcoran, bought everything there. Went to the Hirshhorn, bought everything there, gave it to the library. So what I discovered was the same joy that I got from Leslie introducing me to this work, taking the skull cap off my head, stirring my brain around and saying, I'm glad you got those advanced degrees, but here's what you missed. African American culture is my adopted culture, right? I'm Jamaican, proud of it, but I've spent the majority of my life in this country. And the context of this country, and the context of my skin color in this country, is something I need to share with young people. And it is a story of power, a story of pride, a story of scholarship. I mean, when I stand next to David Driscoll, I get weak in the knees. Forget Jennifer Lawrence. I mean, I'm like, oof. Because, when he starts talking about chauffeuring James Porter around or whatever, and you think, oh my God, I'm one generation from true value. So I'm not in charge of this. I look at Jim all the time. I've known him. His family's known me. I tell him to his face, I wear the flag of your family with pride. So do what I want. No, I'm kidding. Thank you. It has been a remarkable ride, and it culminated last year with an exhibition at the Portland Art Museum, and it's an important place to end. The director of the Portland Art Museum was a friend of Jim's in high school, and at the time he was the chairman of all the directors of museums in America. And this was going to be our largest exhibition today at the Portland Art Museum, Portland, Oregon. And when I went in and sat down at a table not much smaller than this one, with all the people from all the departments, how amazed and proud was I to be ready with a collection that when they looked at me and said, we're sorry, but we really haven't addressed African Americans significantly, ever. I was immediately on board, because people don't confess to the points of omission. And the biggest problem is not just the binary systems of racism, it's omission. And so when they said Native Americans are the minorities here and African Americans are a subgroup within that minority, I was like, okay, what do you need from me? And they said, we need you to put the show together, etc. I said, I'll do it on one condition. We have to get the educational component in. Get your young people that you just got from all across America who are young and, in the best sense of the word, radicalized, and start programs before we even put anything on the wall. They did it. We had the exhibition in Portland and Oregon, and those of you who don't know the history of Oregon, when the Klan lost the war in the South, they moved and drew the borders of Oregon. Up until the 1950s, if you were black, you couldn't own property in most of Oregon, period. Okay? Thank you. See? I was being generous. So I got to wrap it up, but the bottom line is, this was a tough audience. And we were bringing a third of our works at the time. We bought 70 pieces since then. A third of our works at a time to be shown. And when we put the show together, I had to tell people who were higher up the tree than me, had bigger degrees than me, if you want this to work from an educational perspective and also successfully as a venture, a partnership, you have to get out of my way. And they did. And so we have some of the catalogs here, and we put the show together, and the end statement, which I'm very proud to say, is we had a show at the same time as Rodin. That guy. If we failed, the Board of Trustees and the people who did not believe in the mission would have said, aha, 100,000, 102,000 people saw the show in 6 months. New York Times picked us up. We're young. We're not Bill Cosby. We're young. But now we stand at a position where everything we do is seen in context, which is we're here to enlighten, enrich, our shoulders are squared, what we're doing has equal value. It is American art, it is American art, it is American art. And that's where we start. And young people now, if you go online and look, type in PFF collection, Pam, you'll see blogs from some of the high school, middle school teachers with photographs and passionate letters about a small, young collection saying that they've never believed that they could have their young, forgive me, I don't like this word, white kids in the museum for 3.5 hours with their attention fully engaged in African American art. That's why I do this. Thank you.
So we're going to open up the floor now for Q&A. I had the privilege of physically walking through the gallery space to view the exhibition. One of our artists, Harvey Smith, is part of the collection, so his work was featured there. And he also had a solo exhibition.
Apex Gallery.
Yes. Yeah. So it was an amazing visual experience for me. And Harvey can testify to this, that I just went around and around and around. I could not pull myself away from it. I was just in awe. It was done so beautifully. And it was just such a rich cultural experience for me, so I thank you.
Thank you.
For your commitment, for creating that. And so now we're going to open up the floor for everyone to pose questions. This is the time. You've got the top appraiser in the country. You've got the top attorney in the country. You've got the curator, the educational gurus on the other side, Devin, and who has not spoken, so we hope that she will contribute.
I'm sorry, Devin is the collections manager.
Yes.
So you asked me a question, I check with her.
Yeah.
I'm the tip of the spear.
Is it premature for me to say who's acquiring the Biggers?
Oh, no, please.
All right, so Aro Bell Reed, she is the woman who previously owned, up to today, the John Biggers drawing that we are honored to have in the exhibition. The Petrucci collection, I don't have it checked yet, I'm just kidding, is buying it. And they are also adding to their collection the work of Delita Martin.
Again, like Amy
That's
Sherrill.
a prayer. Just say Delita Martin. Yes. She's one to watch. The Fraziers have brought an extraordinary trip.
She's gorgeous.
And so, you know, it's serious. The list is long. The waits are long. Delita is an artist to watch. So, with that said, we're going to ask if anyone out in the audience has any questions.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Alvah. Talking about the insurance component of, I guess, insuring a collection, are there certain companies that you recommend people go to that have more of an experience working with the collection? Because I think about I tried to talk with my insurance provider now, and they just didn't really understand what I was saying.
Yes, good question. I don't work for any insurance companies, so let me say I'm independent of them, but there are insurance companies that are traditionally have worked with art in terms of scheduling. So that would be Chubb's, AXA, Fireman. Some of the others are now becoming more aware of the category and or becoming better at it. But some of the benefits, though, of going with an insurance company like Chubb's is that if you have a loss, say the period from the appraisal to the loss is 4 years, right? Your next appraisal, and it happens at the second year. Chubb's, AXA, and Fireman, yeah, they will automatically do the appreciable amount if there's been some in that time, instead of making you come back and getting a new appraisal. You know, so, you understand what I'm saying? In that gap year, those gap years, they're not going to bother their clients about doing that if they can see easily that the piece has appreciated to that amount. other companies will make you come back and get a new appraisal for the increase. So they do a lot of things in terms of handling, because what they want, they're a wealth management insurance company, and they want all of your business. They want your house, your car, and your personal property. And frankly, it's very, in quote, cheap to do it that way. It comes out less than some of the others that you know, and I'll just say them, Allstate, State Farm and all. It's actually more expensive to get the separate rider on those companies than it is for their premium wealth management companies. And can I say real quickly, pretty much if you're collecting art, you have a house and you live in a, what do we call this, a DMV, you are now in a wealth category, and you need to start treating your assets and your properties and stuff in that manner. Many of us grew up, you know, black, middle class, or whatever, and you don't think of yourself in that way anymore. But, you know, people are always saying, oh, I only got these prints, but you got 30 of them.
Right.
So, you know, aggregately, that adds up. Then you got a house in this area, you know, the house in itself in this area, you know, will put you in a category like that. So you now do need to look at having teams of the lawyer, the appraiser, the accountant is major. The accountant leads the way for all of us in terms of how you should handle the estate planning, the insurance, everything, donations. So we're teams that, you know, work on this.
Just very quickly, I can't tell you how inspiring it has been to listen to my co-presenters today. I kid you not, there's not a night that I go to sleep or go to my studio, because I have a studio with storage there. I have a separate storage facility outside of collecting for Petrucci. I'm a visual artist, I'm a maker. And I have 20-something years of stuff all over the place. I've got stuff still with Jim Kelly there. So listening to Larry say, listening to Alvah today, it's just, it's terrifying. You need to get on this, it's terrifying. I mean, I'm driving down the road thinking, they're gonna just hand my stuff away on eBay.
Oh, there's another question in the rear there?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Boothe. My name is Jennifer Shaw, and I'm here from the DMV area. I'm an artist in the Touchstone Gallery. I listened to you, and I am one of the other people who was, you know, sitting here in awe. I've got pieces around the place and pieces in my third bedroom, and some of them are not framed. And I'm one of those collectors who collected something because I felt it and I loved it, and it's on my wall. But I'm guilty. I need to have that stuff insured and appraised, and I've been, you know, teaching and just doing whatever, and I hadn't really thought about it. So now I'm just thinking, oh my God, what do I do? So how do I start off small? I'm not David Driscoll, I can say, look at my huge collection. But I have a few known names in the pieces and some of the younger artists, and so how do I even get started without getting overwhelmed?
Call Myrtis.
If it's an appraisal that you need to call Alvah.
However, there's this idea that large is best, and it isn't. I have billionaire clients, especially in Naples, Florida, that have 3 pieces, but they're good pieces, you know, and they're pieces, you know, that they cherish, they love. I actually am averse to doing hundreds of pieces that people just bought so that they can pair with their friends or whatever, and you know, so it's not about the number, it's the quality of the work that you get, and hopefully you will love it. I do work with people who could care less, and it's disheartening for me, but I still do their work. But it doesn't have to be a major, I mean, you can do a print collection. One of the best print collections out of the Driscoll Center, he's gone, Mr. Steele, Bob Steele. Bob Steele had one of the finest collections of prints in the country.
Yeah, he was known for his collection of works on paper.
And so also, recently there was a sale of the collection from Doug Moore and his wife. And they had perhaps the most extensive collection of Elizabeth Catlett prints in the country. And so that was another example. And to answer your question about how do you get started, that sheet that I just passed out, you can start filling that out for the pieces that you have. So therefore, when Alvah shows up, because all I'm saying is that you know more about the pieces in your collection than anyone else. So even if they're unknown artists or whatever you put on that sheet will certainly be beneficial to whomever.
And document each and everything.
As much as you can on this sheet.
So I have to do that before we can get insurance.
Well, she's going to do the appraisal, whoever does the appraisal, but all I'm saying to you is, you ask what can you do now? And I'm saying that you have the information and the knowledge to fill in the information.
I'd just like to say something. One of the things you have to do is document.
Yes,
So if you have
microphone.
receipts, you can put it in Excel or a newsletter sheet and print it.
One of the things you can do is you have to document everything. So you can use Excel, put everything in Excel, or use Larry's sheet. Like here, there's also a software program called Collectify. Okay, it's a 1-800 number you can call, and you can purchase that program. It's a one-time purchase, and you can enter the information. It's very intense. So make sure that you have all your documentation together so when you sit down, you can put your information in there. And also you can import any photos of your collection into that program. So that way you know exactly what you have. And it's very important that you do that before you get an appraisal. Because a friend of mine I just talked to up in Philadelphia, she charges $250 an hour for an appraisal. So if you have all your information together, it shortens the time.
A friend of mine does too. That's what we charge.
Right,
We're $250 an hour primarily. But let me say this to you so there won't be any confusion about it. You can take the pictures and you can fill out all this, but as appraisers, we have to do the pictures, the measurements and things too. So it's not a substitute for what we do. Now I can accept from a curator or gallery, I can accept from them this information, but the person has to be in the profession of art for me to accept that information from them. But I can't accept it from a collector, even if you're very good at this. The government, they don't trust you.
I'm going to ask my co-presenters and Myrtis as well, because when we're looking to acquire something, I mean, there are commercial ways you can do this. Services like Ask Art, and other things that you can join for a fee. So some of the people you have in your collection, no matter how small it is, are named people. You can see what the hammer prices are that have gone down. I remember sitting next to a collector from Washington, D.C. at Swan once, and it was a particular piece I won't name, and the sound of the hammer went down. This lovely gentleman, very sort of erudite gentleman, leaned over and said, "That's the value of our culture right there." And I was like, wow, it just hit me. He's right. Because that becomes the value that goes on to Ask Art. And so I wanted to ask Alma, what I wrote it down when you were saying that was, what's the relationship between that kind of thing and what you do? I mean, so I can't get an appraiser. I can get, not Devin because she's busy now, but somebody else who can come in and start to photograph everything and get the measurements and get the dates and all that sort of thing and accrue all of that. But one of the things that I think most people don't really even think about sometimes is, you know, if someone has a Berrisford Boothe that they had from a while ago, and this actually happened 3 days ago, Instagram, one of my pieces I've never seen for years, shows up by this guy I don't know. And I thought it was a scam. And he said, "I don't know much about art, and I certainly don't know about this. I love it, but whatever." And it reminded me of the discussion Devin and I have had while we travel around the country, and that is, who's archiving this? Why aren't institutions getting a young army of people who are going out there? And Alvah and I had a small conversation before we started, who can go out there and work with some of these people, like the ones we work with in their 70s, 80s, 90s. They're busy working. And they don't have any family, half of them. And they are not going to trust some appraisers, no offense, but they're kind of just, you know, they don't know what's up. They're busy trying to... Right. So there are ways to begin this, but there are also some available mechanisms. And I mean, I spent all my time monitoring, not all my time, significant amount, let's just say a pricked ear, waiting to see if one of my pieces comes to auction. You know, because if it's a piece I sold with June Kelly when I was in my 30s in the 90s, and it comes up for auction, I sold it for $5 grand, I'm at that auction. Because I've got to maintain my value.
Well, let me just say this about auctions. Auctions are any given day.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
And a lot of people have had a lot of comments about Swan auction, and I'll just be very candid about it. As an appraiser, that is the thing that changed our whole dynamics, because before, none of the prices were published.
Right.
And the government, you hear me always talking about the government, because
They're coming.
okay, no, the government doesn't like a lot of times gallery prices because they know galleries make discount for their clients. The only thing that they can go by is published prices, and that is the auction world. But in the auction world, it's any given day. Okay, a good example, I was over Sloan, talking to Stephanie. I look up, I see a Sam Gilliam drape, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to bring a drape. She goes, yeah, it's for the auction tomorrow. So I said, I'll keep up with the price. The next day I forgot, okay? Somebody is calling me saying, did you see what the Sam Gilliam sold for over at Sloan? And I was like, oh, I saw it when I was in there talking to Stephanie, because we're buddies. And they said, yeah, $3,500. It's like, I can't believe that.
It's the same thing.
So I'm draped.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, any given Sunday or any given day. So I called Stephanie and I said, Steph, you got an error in your auction results, because I just knew it was an error. You know, it's supposed to be 300,000 or whatever. And she said, here's what happened. It was number 3 on the list to come up for auction. It was raining very hard that day. There was an accident in Wisconsin and whatever that kept the traffic all tied up. When they got to the 3rd one, there were 4 people seated. They were all antique dealers, and when it came up, they looked around at each other, even though none of them are interested in that. They put their money together and bought it, and of course sold it for what it's worth. But the only people seated was 4 people. Any given day, this is what happens at auction. It can go the opposite way.
Yes,
We've been in auctions with especially African art. There's this Italian guy and this Asian guy that hate each other. They'll start a bid, and I'll be there for a client, and the piece should go for about 25 grand. Even, that's a good price for it. When they get through and it's up to 400 grand, because they're not going to let the other one outbid them, because the egos of both of them, you know who I'm talking about. I mean, people, we go and get coffee and stuff while they're bidding, because the bidding war between these 2 guys is going to make this price. So is that the price? When I report to the government, that is the price, because that was negotiated that day. Same thing for the Gilliam. That is the price.
To her point, she just reminded me of something. I'm going to ask you, both of you, Myrtis, is there anything we can do about this? We were informed about it, Jacob Lawrence, right? Appropriate Lawrence, all the provenance is there, small piece, gorgeous, it's Jacob. Don't really care, it's Jacob. I know what it's supposed to go for. If they're asking for 125 or whatever, that's what it's worth. I've done the research. This is a new thing that's happening since Swan is now in their, 10th year. And you've got to remember, think about the history of African Americans in this country. It's only been 10 years since any auction house, outside of Rosenfeld and certain other galleries that were selling, that an auction house has been selling specifically African American art. That's how recent it is. And yet, that's enough, based on what Alan was saying, that the gallery, which will remain unnamed, we call them up. I have to stammer when I say this, 563% markup. Okay? Now, here's the problem. Somebody's going to pay that in their world. Not in the rest of the world. None of us are going to do that. Nobody at Swan's going to do that, but in their special niche world where the resources are. So what we have now is not only all the other problems we've been talking about and how to ameliorate some of those things and deal with them, but also we have nefarious economic systems at play that are going to hyperinflate the value of the work, and you've got to go with that, as you're saying, correct?
The market has gotten away from us. So if you're buying, keep buying, get everything you can now. And it's been going, people who come to other lectures, they know I've been talking about this for 10 years. At the Porter Colloquium, 8 years ago, You know, I try to tell y'all, because I have clients that have been, you know, buying for years. This category is a very discount market for them. You know, I have clients that are millionaires and billionaires and whatever, and so paying $200,000 for a painting is nothing, lunch money. And they see a category growing and they step into it. We've met with Sotheby's and Christie's, what, 15 years ago, as they watch these auctions, Swan and everything, because they're going to swoop into. See, they just let them build the market,
Exactly.
and now they're getting ready to swoop.
They've already
started,
Yeah.
See, they've started the swooping and stuff. But it's economics. Sure. You know, it's economics. So, you know, if you don't have it coming now or real soon, you're not going to be able to afford. We are not going to be able to afford our artists, except for our celebrities. And I will say, some of our celebrities are stepping up. You know, and I'm sorry, the hip hop guys, Wiz Beat, that's married to
Beats, yes.
And who else did I tell you?
Russell Simmons and his brother, Rush Arts.
Yeah, some of them, you know, I'm actually very proud of them, have stepped into the market. We've sat next to Beyonce's mom, you know, even at Swan, you know, and so.
But don't be discouraged. I mean, the art schools are around. Young people with vision are around, and you should start a collection that, as Larry said, makes your heart jump. You know, it's still very legitimate. My client asked me very recently, you know, a sort of all shucks kind of question, like, are you, in this next round of people that we're buying, delete all these other people, are you, what's it going to be like in 50 years, you know? I told him directly, I said, have you ever seen, you know, the Hort collection in New York City, in Tribeca? It's a, you know, 4-story brownstone with 3,000 pieces of art, and they charge $20 once a year during Art Week, and you go walk through this place, and it's ridiculous the amount of early stuff they have, like Hindawali and whatever else. But you know what else they have? People I've never heard of. And I stood in front of their work, and I still haven't heard of them, and my heart still hasn't stopped beating. So you still, you know, this is happening, but it's not either or. Evolution always says and with. So you can still buy works on paper. You can still buy things from the students. One of my colleagues at Lehigh just went through Penn, doing a walkthrough with the jury pool, and he called me up and emailed me right away. He said, there's this young brother there, that's crazy. And I went online and I told Myrtis about him, and I looked at him and I just saw it. You know, I saw what the rest of the people are carrying forward, that power, that undenying sense of presence and power, and I'm like, I'm getting that. You know, and now his price points are affordable. So that's what you keep your eye open for. It's just because the economics have taken over, it doesn't mean that our voices are unaffordable to those of us who are so inclined.
Yeah, and with the opening of the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, there's been a validation. For many of our artists, their work is still grossly undervalued, and but the interest has certainly broadened. And there are certain segments of our society that have been collecting African American art, and many African Americans have been collecting African American art for a number of years. So in many ways, we are beginning to see a validation in terms of the economics. And Swans has certainly helped to raise their profile. They've contributed to that. I don't think they have solely contributed to that, but they get a lot of credit because, you know, we sort of look to certain people for that level, for that validation, and so they've brought that. And yeah, I have shared this story that when the first auction Swans held, you know, you can go a couple of days before the auction to preview the work. And I was the only African American person in the room. And there were people there with their heads down in the catalogs and going back and forth. And it was like simultaneously, all heads rose. And they looked at me like, what are you doing in here? And I'm like, I'm owning this. That's what I'm doing here. So I left them all puzzled. And, but, yeah, so I hesitate to say now is our time because we've been around for nearly 30 years and have seen this growth and been a part of this evolution. But it is an awakening. It's almost like another renaissance for us. And I'm happy because we have people here today that are fully aware of that and becoming more aware and are engaged in the preservation and cultivation of African American and African art as well.
Before another question, one other thing to keep your eye open for, and this really worked for us. 3 pieces, one by Alan Rohan Craig, one by Norman Lewis just before the PAFA show, and the portfolio out of Bob Blackburn's studio with Romeo Bearden and Couture and everybody in there. When I went to Swan, what they had was by any metric garbage. It was damaged. So here's a clever way to collect. Figure out how much it's going to cost to conserve the piece. Buy it. Most of those pieces, nobody wants them. They go at auction, they're worth thousands more than they go for. And you might have to pay a conservator $2,000. So we bought a Norman Lewis, and I was literally in the toilet with my cell phone, calling my lifeline, going, should I buy it? And he says, get it. And I said, but the portfolio has water damage, and there's registration done. He said, get it. And we got those. And we had a Hungarian woman in Germantown killed. And the only other Norman Lewis I saw was at the show at PAFA. It was part of a twin piece that he did. So that value's gone through the roof now. And, you know, met his daughter and all that. And as far as the crate, he hand-bound a book of illustrations that he had approved by the AME Church. And flew in the bishop, looked at them, illustrations from biblical illustrations. And some guy in Massachusetts had this book, and he kept showing up at auctions and disappearing. Showing up and disappearing. And at the time, the person I was working with, the consultant, we said, we gotta trace this down. So we did a little Columbo detective work. Found this guy and said, what are your intentions with my daughter? And he was like, and he was waiting, like someone who buys a property for gentrification. He was waiting for what we're talking about so he could score. And my argument to him is I'm really happy, but here's the value, here's how we figured it out, we had it appraised, blah, blah, blah. Here's what it's going to cost to conserve this. I'm happy you're waiting and sitting on this egg, but I have a culture to protect, and we're making an offer. Here it is, take it or leave it. He sent it to us. We got it conserved. We were able to find the exact same leather Crite used. We had it hand-stitched. We digitally documented it. So now when you go to the museum and look at it, it's interactive. You can go on the page, you can zoom into each cutout. So yeah, this is fantastic. But that's a way to get something for way undervalued. I mean, that's a one-of-a-kind piece. Hand-bound by Alan Crite. Guess what that's worth?
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Here you are.
First, I have a comment. I've known these 3 illustrious professionals here who has advised me for over 15 years, I know, at least 15 years. So I appreciate that. I don't know who introduced, whether Alvah introduced me to Myrtis or Myrtis introduced me to Alvah, and then they introduced me to Larry. So I've been working with all 3. I have a question here. As you all know, I have a South African art collection, a black South African art collection that is not very well known in this country, but very well known in Europe and other places and valuable. I think Alvah, years ago, I've been working on this project for 10 years, I don't know. I'm developing a catalog now of these works. I think Alvah said to me years ago, or it's been at least 5 or 6 years ago, she came out and she says, if you know these artists, it would be best for you to get them to appraise their work than to have me to go and do all this research. Well, I've done that. I have gotten the provenance from all of them and pictures, and then there's an American sculptor, Ed White, that I have a number of his, and he's done a job. My question is, do I still have to come to have you to appraise their appraisals of their work? Or the government requirement? They have given me the provenance, they have signed off on it, the measurements and all of those things. So is there still a requirement to have?
Now it is. Yeah, for one thing, at that time they were unknown artists and they were unknown artists and they were in South Africa. And so research over here was going to be difficult. So that's why I signed her, because she's good at following direction and getting what she needs to get for the research. But now the explosive market is the contemporary African artists. It is explosive. It is, it's a different market. So in just 5 years, everything has changed. So now we're able to, because even the Smithsonian has involved themselves in listing all of the African artists now by country that wasn't in place before. The librarian over there, Janet Stanley, has now documented, so it's a different, just in 5 years, this has changed dramatically. And so, yeah, now you get appraisal.
So now I have to bring all the works to you to get them, the
Or somebody.
American ones and the South African ones?
They're called contemporary African art. That's the way it's looked at now. And that is the market.
Questions?
So we'll take
And it
one
started
last.
with Bonhams. Bonhams had a contemporary
Yes.
now show, and about, 5 years ago, that changed the whole dynamics, and now those pieces are the centerpiece of collecting.
So they're doing for South African art what Swans has done for African American art.
I just wanted to share with you one tip and one experience that I had. It's probably 15, 20 years ago now. But depending on what your plan for your legacy is, I happened to be at Midtown Basin Gallery, which was the predecessor for D.C. Moore, which is in New York. And I was doing a project with Jacob Lawrence at the time. He had a show there. And I met a couple there from the Philadelphia area who purchased the most expensive piece that was in the show. Anyway, I was having a conversation. I said, well, you collect Jacob Lawrence, or you collect other African-American works? And they said, no. Said, we actually, I mean, they had all the big names. They had, they had Kooning, they had Jasper Johns, they had, all of the big names. They said to me, they said, but none of the pieces that we have are the imported pieces. They said, but this piece that we're purchasing, that we purchased from Jacob Lawrence, this will probably make us imported and will give us a name for eternity, because this will be a piece that there will be a museum that will want this piece. And I was like, really? So all I'm just saying is that there are people out who have different motives in terms as to why they are purchasing some of these works. And some of them are prepared to purchase at the top end of the market. And so they may be prepared to pay, we think in terms of value, but there's more than just the price, but there's also in terms of what is the importance of this piece for the whole narrative of whatever, whether it be the MoMA or whomever, in terms of imported pieces. So, and that was a part of their whole estate planning as well, because they had an interest in terms of, his wife, I think her term was, he said, this will take us into immortality. That was her.
Sometimes for collectors, it's strictly an investment. It's associated with ego. It has a lot to talk about it. And, there are very different motives. So, there's investment clubs, there's all different levels of financing for art and leveraging the collection to purchase other works of art, or, the reasons go on, and that's a separate discussion, but it's one worth having at some point, because it's mind-boggling. And when you see those auction results that are like extraordinary, there's a motive behind that. Someone is protecting their investment. And sometimes work that's offered at auction is actually bought back from the original owner or group. So they're leveraging that. They're doing that to raise the value of the entire collection. So there's a science behind it.
There was a question down there.
But we'll take one more question and then we'll close.
Well, since I have a microphone, I guess I get the question.
Yes.
My name is Ava, and I'd like to thank Myrtis as well as all of our presenters for a fabulous afternoon of information and sharing. I wanted to share with you that my husband and I have recently begun participating in the Swan auctions. And last year we went to the gallery after an auction to pay for the things that we had purchased that day. And it was interesting because we were in there and they were going in the back and they were looking for a piece, and While they were doing that, he and I were just kind of milling around, and we began to notice that there was a gentleman there from Rosenfeld who was examining, measuring, and photographing the Gilliams that they had purchased during the auction. I noticed that there were pieces that were wrapped to be shipped, one of which was going to the Princeton Museum. And my husband said, you see, I told you that we're bidding against dealers and gallery owners in some cases. And that's why you have to be very cautious. So I just wanted to share that with you because we saw it firsthand.
Yeah, that's very true. And Jackie Randolph, one of my clients at the end with a hat on, I buy an auction for my clients, and I counsel them on how to do that very strategically and with a limit in mind, because you don't know who's bidding against you and what the motives of that person, and it's not all cynical, but that is an element that needs to be considered. And especially when I'm at auction, buying at auction for a client that has deep pockets, the conversation is, you really like this piece, right? But there are others by that artist that I'm sure we can, find something that's more to your liking. So don't allow the ego to get in the way of common sense. And don't allow the emotion to get in the way of common sense. Because I was at auction with a client, she had very deep pockets and she was getting ready, and I pushed her hand down. I said, no, because we factored in the
25%.
The 25% above, and fortunately, she did get the piece. But and you also don't want to bid against yourself, so just relax. And let the panel stay on your lap. And so she was very pleased with the results of everything that we went up to acquire that day. But I am going to close out, and first I want to pay homage to Peggy Cooper-K-Fritz, who I think in the Washington Post they called her the grande dame of art. She was a client who we were honored to have as part of the individuals who support what it is that we do here. One of our artists is featured in her book, Wesley Clark. The other two acquisitions, one being Delita Martin and Jamia Richmond Edwards, did not make the book. They were bought just a couple of months ago. And when she was here, her health was very fragile. So I encourage you all to buy the book. This is a really wonderful example of someone whose life was devoted to raising the awareness of African American art. Her investments in the artists were just incredible. And talk about a legacy in art. And she was one of the founders of the Duke Ellington School. So she will be missed by many and certainly loved by most. So thank you, Peggy Cooper-K-Fritz, for honoring us with your support. And to my panelists, I told you that these people were amazing. And thank you so much for committing your time here today, sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and your wisdom. I hope you all have benefited from being here this afternoon. I mean, this is why we exist, is to educate so that you understand the importance of who we are and those that we run in circles with. This is also an afternoon about relationships. My gallery does not exist in a bubble. I'm here because I service my clients by directing them to people who are knowledgeable, experienced, credentials, scholars. I know that when I talk about collections now, I'm going to be sending people to the Petrucci Foundation collection site so they can see the rich collection that's there, why it's important, what's going on behind that collection. As the Fraziers can attest to, I sent them a list of books so that they can begin to educate themselves on what to do, how to do, who to look for, who to work with, and not just from Galerie Myrtis, but other reputable galleries and professionals that can help them along the path. we have encountered too many situations where artwork is lost. Pieces have been tossed because the children didn't value it, or because someone didn't have the proper paperwork in place and documents in place. And one of my clients, his uncle was walking past Alvah Thomas's apartment. The family was removing the household goods, and the uncle volunteered to help. The nephew inherited the painting that the family gave the uncle for helping that day. And because I'm a child of God, when I saw the painting, and he didn't know who Alvah Thomas was, it was over the piano, I said, oh my God, that's an Alvah Thomas piece, that's incredible. He said, I don't know who Alvah Thomas is, and he shared the story, and I was like, when did I offer him a couple of $1,000? So instead, what I did was said, you call the appraiser, and of course I became he and his wife's best friend because they could not believe. I don't know what the results were, but I know they were pleased because I never crossed that line. But they were really happy. So all this to say that, you know, what we do here is important, and your contribution to making that happen is equally important. So we thank you all for being here today.